Thank you, everybody. This is a beautiful organization, and I couldn't believe I never heard of it until I was asked to speak. I love what you do. I love your philosophy. I love everything about it. So thank you very, very much. And today I am talking about love. I'm talking about discovering love for eternity. And so again, thank you so very much. You're doing a great job. And thank you for the Zoom folks here. It's very, very nice to
Perhaps you'll Zoom with us sometime.
perhaps.
Yeah.
So today I'm talking about discovering love for eternity. I wanted to share what happened with me. So I'm going to give you a variety of experiences and then some thoughts about how to keep love within ourselves and be shared to all. So my brother David passed at the age of 37. It was 1995. And when I was looking at your founders' beautiful information, they were involved in this right around the same time that my brother passed. And I was 30, David was 37. He was 4 years younger than I. I couldn't understand why he died. He died of AIDS. It was in the 1990s when thousands and thousands and thousands of people that were gay were dying. And I couldn't understand why that happened. Made no sense to me. David had come out that he was gay when he was about 22. My family was supportive, thank goodness. And when he passed, he was HIV positive, and then it turned into AIDS. And he passed after 7 years. 6 weeks after he passed, I was riding my horse through a Christmas tree farm, and I got the best present of my life. And you'll hear the Boston accent, definitely will hear that. Well, that's good, thanks. You know, when we feel grief, our heart is closed. And that's the way mine was for 6 weeks. And I couldn't feel anything except for the grief. I think everything in life is positive, and I could find nothing positive about the fact that my brother had passed. I was in Chester Springs, Pennsylvania, which is about maybe an hour, maybe 40 minutes south of here. And it was a beautiful day. David passed on October 1st. It was middle of November. We had just had our first frost. Icicles were hanging from the trees, rainbows were sparkling. And I opened my heart just a little, and I said, thank you, universe, for a beautiful day. I closed my eyes, and there was my brother. I was not psychic, spiritual. I had no awareness that I could communicate with anybody from the afterlife. I didn't even know the afterlife was real. But there was my brother. He was wearing a black and red plaid flannel shirt, dungarees, and sandals. And I started to talk with him and realized I didn't have to talk after about maybe 1 second. I realized I could just share thought. And so I said, David, how are you doing? And he was great. And he said, how are you doing? And I'm great. And I looked to the right, and they were my grandparents, Abe and Bessie Dole, that had passed 10 years ago. And they were holding hands like they always did. Beside my grandparents on my mother's side was Edward. And Edward had just passed about 6 months ago, a childhood family friend. Beside Edward was a friend of mine, Holly, who had passed about 20 years ago from a motor vehicle accident. And I was like, wow, here's all these people that had just passed. The scene was filled with love. It was luminescent. I looked on the hill. There was a hill beside some of these folks. And I used to play the church organ. I'm a PK, a preacher's kid. Wasn't spiritual at all. Wasn't religious, but I was a church organist. And I knew that I had played the organ for these 24 people that were on the hill. So I looked back at David, and behind him was a golden arch, not McDonald's, but it was a golden arch. And when David had passed, I knew he was HIV positive, which would then turn into AIDS. He asked me not to share with anybody. And so I didn't have a support system. I had ended up during the 7 years of his passage at Barnes & Noble in Exton, Pennsylvania. I'm a science-based occupational therapist. I had no idea that there was even a component called New Age, but somehow I found myself in the New Age section, and I know now that I was guided. And so I had read a variety of books and sent some to David about the afterlife, that maybe there might be a slight possibility that he would continue to survive. But I didn't know anybody that knew this, and didn't really talk to anybody about it either. So in these books, it said that if you see a doorway and you feel comfortable, go through it. So I looked to David to see if he was going to take me through this golden colored arch. And instead, my 4'10" grandmother takes me by the hand and we skip through this arch. And so on the other side of the arch was a fuchsia colored land. Now, my husband Jeff and I have 2 children. And at the time, 2 boys, they were 6 and 8 years old. And they now are in their late 30s. And they said they've heard this story, as you can well imagine, a variety of times. And they say, Mom, do not say fuchsia. And I'm like, well, why not? And they said, it sounds like you're tripping, sounds like you're high, sounds like you're loaded. I wasn't any of those. And it was brilliant fuchsia, like it was so vibrant. It was almost like one of those colors in that beautiful tapestry, but just explosively vibrant, beautiful. And I hear my father's father, Gramps, who had passed 15 years ago. I didn't see him, I heard him. And he says, get over here, in a beautiful, loving fashion. And he takes me by the hand and we fly. We fly through this beautiful fuchsia colored land for what seemed like hours. And then all of a sudden, my horse starts to move. And so here we are. I'm flying through this fuchsia colored land and the horse is moving. And I say to Gramps, Gramps, I need to go back. So we do this U-turn in this fuchsia colored land. We come to the Golden Arch. I fly through the arch. I land right in front of my brother. There's my brother. There's Grandma and Grandpa, Edward, Holly, 24 other people. The horse is moving. And I say to them all, I need to go back. And you know what they all said at the same time? We will always be here. We will always be here. I pulled up the reins and thought, what just happened with me? What just happened to me? It was absolutely the most love-filled situation I had ever experienced. I'd never experienced anything like that. I sat on the horse for about 20 minutes and I ended up writing a book about the first year after David passed, and you'll understand that I still probably am, a workaholic. And so I went back to work and thought, my gosh, this is incredible. I ended up asking for a teacher. I couldn't find somebody to teach me how to continue communicating with my brother. And I ended up finding a wonderful woman named Nancy Ariel. She was a shaman, and she was introduced to me because she communicated with people that had passed on. And so I met, her name's Nancy Ariel, and she lived in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is not normally the place where I would think shamans would live, but I thought they lived in Peru or Brazil or whatever, but she was in Reading, Pennsylvania. So I ended up apprenticing with Nancy for 3 to 6 hours a week and learned how to continue communicating with my brother, met all sorts of entities. And Nancy took me that very first time I met her. She took me on what's called a shamanic journey, which many of you probably are familiar with. And so we went on this shamanic journey. I had a bird come, it was a raven actually, raven come and take me through all different realms. I had never done anything like this before. I was lying flat on my back and it was on a massage table. And Nancy also used Reiki in order to facilitate this whole process. And so when we were flying through, I was sitting on the back of this raven, we're flying through a long tunnel, and the tunnel ended up with a beautiful scene of light. The scene was incredible. And so I'm in this amazing light-filled area, and I see 5 beings. Now, these 5 beings were covered with a cape. Each one of them had a cape. For me, they were male. And one of them walks forward. I had been an agnostic, an atheist. I struggled with what is after this life? What is this life we're living? I didn't at the time believe in God, but I thought there might be something. So this being with a cape on, I couldn't see the face, walk forward, and for me, that was God. And I knelt down in front of God. And Nancy, the way she did this shamanic journey is she said to please tell her what's going on. So she heard me saying, and now I'm with God. And she said, Becky, ask a question. And I thought, who am I? Who am I to ask a question of God? Who am I? And she says, no, it's okay, ask a question. Okay. And so I said, where do I go from here? And the answer was love yourself. Mm-hmm. Love yourself. I didn't know who I was, but that was what I was receiving. Love yourself. So there's more to the story and such, but it really was an interesting way to receive this message and for all of us to love ourselves. A couple of months later, I went to the American Occupational Therapy Association annual conference. Next year, I'm going to be an OT for 50 years. I always go to the annual conference, and I've been very involved in the leadership of AOTA. So I'd had all these experiences. I just gave you a couple, and I shared them with many professional occupational therapists, and they looked at me and thought I was nuts. And I had no filter, none. Put me back about 10 years organizationally, but that's sort of how it is. At the very last day of conference, I sat beside a nun. I'm like, oh, let me see what this nun thinks about life. And she says, last weekend, I went to a conference in New York, and it was on automatic writing. And I'm like, what's that? And she says, automatic writing is when you go into meditation and you're really connected with yourself, and you're writing down your meditation, or you're writing down your experiences. And all of a sudden, you're writing with a pen, and your hand starts to move across the page under its own volition. And I'm like, you're kidding. And so I thought that was interesting. The next day, I was riding my horse, and I always used to ride through the woods, and nature is very, very healing. I always encourage people to spend time in nature. So I'm riding through the woods, and I'm meditating with my horse, and I go back, I put her out in the pasture, and I was sitting in my car before I went back to work, and I'm writing the journal, my journal of these meditations, and all of a sudden, my hand starts to move across the page. And it was a poem. And I, at the time, was not at all interested in poetry, so I knew it wasn't me. And so I said, who are you? I wrote, who are you? And the answer was love. And I said, love in capital letters, question mark, question mark, question mark. I didn't know there was anything like love that could be talking to me. And the fellow, it was for me again, another male, and he says, I am Lot, L-O-T. And that was an easier concept for me at the time to understand. So Lot actually came to me every single day for 5 days. And if any of you have done automatic writing, a lot of times it comes really fast. And so I'm doing it, I'm doing it with my pen, and I'm writing on my yellow pad. I always have yellow pads, And so I'm writing on my yellow pad, and I'm sharing all this information. It was very similar to Neil Donald Walsh, Conversations with God, very similar. And so after about 5 days, I'm shaking my hand because my hand was tired. I was writing so fast, and it was beautiful, beautiful information. And pretty soon, Watt writes, why don't you use a computer? Now, this is 1996. And I'm like, a computer? To me, I'm talking to this ancient being. How could I use a computer? Like, it made absolutely no sense to me at all. And he said, yes, you're a very good typist. And at the time I was like 90 words a minute. So I was a good typist, but it just didn't resonate. And he says, well, yes, it'll be much easier, and you'll be able to get all this down. So I was in my house, I go downstairs, pick up, and at the time, 1996, the computers are big. And so I brought up this big computer and put it on the dining room table, because that's where I was, because it looked outside. And so I sat there in ready position, closed my eyes, and put my hands, in ready position on the computer. And it was incredible. I now have about 4,000 pages of this lovely information about love and peace and joy and connection and oneness. And my husband, Lot stayed with me for every day for 3 months. And my husband, Jeff, would sit beside me, and he'd say, ask Lot this. And I'm like, well, you can ask him, Jeff. You ask him. He goes, no. You've got the connection. And he was trying to trip him up. He was trying to ask a question that he wouldn't have an answer to. And every single thing he asked was valid. Really was quite something. During the time. So anyway, Lot, after 3 months, he leaves. And the way he leaves is he says, Becky, Rebecca, call me Rebecca. And it was spelled Rebekah, which is an older form of Rebecca. So anyway, he says, Rebecca, he's typing. I'm typing his information because I would hear it in my head. Says, I'm going to leave. And I'm like, and why are you going to leave? He says, there's hundreds of spiritual entities that want to talk with you, and I'm going to let them come. And so I've talked a lot. I can still get them, but I've talked to him a couple of times since then. But meanwhile, it's been so fun to communicate with hundreds of spiritual entities. During the time, this is 1996, I knew I was getting a little far out because this is the 90s. Like now, we're much more receptive to what's happening, but this was the 90s and people really weren't talking about doing any of this. But there was an occupational therapist and she was teaching Reiki. And I learned Reiki, and Reiki is called unconditional love. And so I was starting to receive and starting to feel love and starting to own who I was and to share love. It was really quite spectacular. And now I've taught thousands of primarily medical professionals Reiki, because you can learn it really fast. And it teaches you how to help yourself heal and how to help heal others. It's really been spectacular. I had grown my business now I had a business for 32 years, and I served a lot of the sites up here in Bucks County. So it's really fun. It was in 3 states. I grew it from, you were saying, from 1 person to 350 staff, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech. And I was 60. So this is 11 years ago. And I said to my chief financial officer, Bob, who just finished running the Boston Marathon, I said to him, hey, Bob, my soul is crying out for me to share what's happened with me. Because I, for 20 years, explored every single complementary modality, after-death communication, any type of spiritual workshop, conference. I was for 20 years and I kept it quiet. I said, my soul is crying out for me to share what happened with me. And he said, Becky, I'd be very glad to stay here, even if you're not here. And I looked at him and I said, Bob, do you mean you'd like to buy the business? Because we had talked about me selling and we knew the price and we worked together for 22 years. And so we knew what that meant. And he said, only if you think I can do it. Now, for 32 years, I had grown this business. And for him, one of my best friends, an excellent financial person, to say, I'd like to stay here. I thought, okay. I sold the business to him during a year of training. Like, he became president, I became CEO, and we even used the same lawyer. I mean, that's how much we respected each other. And I sold the business specifically to write this book called Changemaker, How My Brother's Death Woke Up My Life. I kept in that book that I was an OT. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was waiting. It came out in 2016. I was sort of waiting for the American OT Association to call me up and say, Becky, you are not part of the OT profession anymore. But there's a component of occupational therapy called spirituality. So that call never happened. My husband and I are visiting all the national parks, and we were in Olympic National Park, state of Washington, whole rainforest, HOH. We have a rainforest in the United States. And this was 1997. No, wrong, sorry. 2017. It's getting confused here on the dates. 2017. I'm in the whole rainforest. I look at my phone and it says, congratulations, Changemaker, How My Brother's Death Woke Up My Life has just won 3 National Book Awards. Can you please come to the Book Expo of America and pick them up? And I'm like, oh, right. And it wasn't an ego. It was after-death communication is hitting the mainstream. So I'm almost done, and then I'm going to open up for questions. A couple of years later, I decided a really good place for me to market this book would be the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And maybe you are familiar with IANDS. I had followed the International Association for Near-Death Studies for years, and I knew a lot about it, but I'd never gone to the annual conference because it was always during our family vacation. So I decided, okay, went to bed one night, I'm gonna go to IANDS, and I'll miss the family vacation, but I'm gonna market the book. And I wake up the next morning and the very first email was from IANDS, and it said, submit a proposal to speak. And I'm like, all right. Because when you're on the right path, synchronicities happen, absolutely happen. So I submitted a proposal, was able to go there and talked about after-death communication, because that was my big gig. And it turned out the next year, the conference, the IANDS conference, was in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. And so it was right here. This was in 2019, and I became the healing coordinator. The thing about near-death experiences is that a near-death experience is now considered a medical event. Johns Hopkins University Press did a whole journal on it, whole journal article, whole journal on it. Near-death experience is defined as your body flatlines, so you're dead. But your consciousness travels to different realms. 80% of the time, you meet deceased loved ones. When I was at conference, there's a fellow by the name of Bruce Grayson. He's a physician and a psychiatrist. And he said, consciousness is separate from your brain. And I'm like, okay. For me, as a science-based OT, I'm like, okay, consciousness is separate from the brain. And so it's been really, really fun to have IANDS as a major leader in the recognition that consciousness is separate from the brain. The afterlife is real. If you're interested in learning more about attending IANDS conference, it's in Chicago this year on Labor Day. And I'm in charge of the healers. I'm in charge of the healing practitioners. Last year, we had 36 experienced healing practitioners providing 550 20-minute one-to-one healing sessions. And it works. You know, it really is quite something. And so if you're interested in maybe being a healer, feel free to talk to me. So I want to finish this up by saying we need to accept and understand who we are before we can truly understand our connection with life, before we can truly understand how to love ourselves. Because if we can love ourselves, we can share love freely with everybody. Because the connection between our life here and the life in the afterlife is love. That's the connection. And when people pass, they feel that love. And we can receive that love from those that have passed. And so I thank you so very much for asking me to speak. I'm available for any questions. I have the book here, Changemaker, How My Brother's Death Woke Up My Life. If you wanted to get that, it's on Amazon, the whole thing. But anyway, thank you so very much for listening. And feel free to ask me anything.